Nearly 2 months into the season, every miner in the Klondike is on the gold, except Tony.
In the Yukon, power isn't given. It's carved from ice, steel, and frozen earth. Every move in this land is strategy, risk, and relentless pressure. For years, Tony Beets ruled it all. Dominant, defiant, unstoppable. Then, in a twist no one saw coming, the king was taken down. Not by a rival miner, but by authority, shut out of his own claim, by a force he couldn't fight. And here's the part no one talks about. When a king falls, the entire game changes. Parker Schnabel didn't hesitate. He didn't pause. He moved in, and the race for the Yukon throne had begun. What came next was one of the fastest power shifts the Yukon has ever witnessed. Parker didn't just step in, he seized the moment, turning Tony's sudden downfall into a calculated gold-lined opportunity, a perfect checkmate. Executed before anyone even realized the board had been reset. The news spread like wildfire across the valley. Within hours, whispers became shouts. Miners abandoned their own claims, scrambling to ridgelines with binoculars trained on Tony's land. Fingers pointed. Rumors ignited like sparks on dry timber. Some said inspectors had discovered massive, unauthorized dig zones stretching far beyond Tony's permits. Others swore it wasn't about permits at all, that politics and power plays had triggered the shutdown. In the Yukon, reputations don't fade slowly. They vanish overnight. One rumor burned hotter than the rest. Tony had openly ignored a new territorial mining order, snapping back at an official with his trademark growl, "You don't tell me where I dig." For decades, Tony Beets was the embodiment of Yukon defiance, a miner who followed no script, broke every expectation, and built a fortune by doing things his way. But this time, the system pushed back, and it didn't blink. His claim fell silent. Dredges that once thundered across the valley now stood frozen in place, steel frames locked in ice like prehistoric skeletons. The roar that once echoed for miles was gone. His crew, men who'd stood by him for years, huddled around fires, stunned, watching their future evaporate in the cold. And Tony himself, nowhere in sight. But silence in one camp was the signal flare for another. Across the Klondike, inside a warm operations trailer, Parker Schnabel stared at a headline glowing on his laptop. Beets operation suspended indefinitely. The room went quiet. His crew waited. Seconds dragged. Then Parker smiled. He didn't need to say a word. Everyone there understood exactly what this meant. The fallout was instant. Mining forums erupted. Radios crackled non-stop. Social feeds across the north flooded with speculation. In Dawson City bars, old-timers argued late into the night. Some said Tony finally crossed a line. Others swore it was a government hit job. When the official report dropped, it cited hydraulic overreach and ignored reclamation orders. Case closed, or so it seemed. Behind the scenes, a leaked internal memo told a different story. Complaints about excessive noise, altered creek flows, possible interference with protected heritage zones, and buried deep inside, a classified reference to third-party submissions. Someone had been feeding regulators information, and whoever it was knew exactly what they were doing. When reporters finally caught Tony, his anger exploded on camera. Snow lashed his face as he shouted, "They call me reckless? I've been mining here longer than half those desk jockeys have been alive. They hate me because I don't bow to them." The clip went viral. To some, he was a legend. To others, an outlaw who finally got caught. While the world argued, Parker prepared. His laptop filled with satellite overlays and claim maps. One red outline glowed brighter than the rest. Beets Creek, the channel Tony believed would cement his legacy. That crown was now hanging in mid-air. Tony's empire had been shut down with paperwork. Parker was about to respond with horsepower. Snow drifted through Tony's abandoned yard like ash after a fire. Warning tape snapped in the wind. Chains sealed gates that once never closed. Machines that shook the earth now sat entombed in ice. Relics of a halted reign. Tony paced the site, shouting into his phone, demanding answers that never came. You shut me down without warning. You call this process. The wind swallowed his words, but not his fury. Inside the equipment shed, he ripped an inspection report in half. A nearby camera only pushed him further. He kicked a frozen hydraulic line. It cracked like a gunshot. They want a spectacle, he snarled. I'll give them one. Then came a new sound. Engines. To the east, a convoy emerged. Bright yellow trucks slicing through the white terrain. Parker's fleet. Heavy equipment moving in flawless formation, carving a direct path toward Beets Creek. For Tony's crew, it felt like a gut punch. What most people missed was this. Parker hadn't improvised. This wasn't luck. Within hours of the shutdown, his legal team filed claims under a newly formed company, Klondike North Ventures. On paper, it was separate. In reality, it was Parker's Trojan horse. The filings were pristine, approved fast, prepared in advance. His team had been watching the situation long before the hammer fell, and the second it did, the takeover began. Because real strategy isn't about reacting, it's about being ready before anyone else realizes there's a fight. While Tony's machine sat frozen, Parker's crew was ripping into fresh ground miles away. Quietly, methodically, he had already bought up the surrounding access leases, tiny parcels Tony relied on for roads and runoff, small pieces, massive consequence. With those claims secured, Parker boxed Tony in completely. No expansion, no access, no escape, just like chess. And the king never saw it coming. Access roads were expanded almost overnight. Power lines stretched deeper into the valley. From a mobile command trailer, Parker's logistics crew ran the operation with clockwork precision. By the second night, towering floodlights turned the darkness into daylight, bathing the valley like a packed stadium under prime-time lights. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Tony's legendary dredge sat swallowed by darkness, silent and cold, while Parker's machines thundered less than a mile away. A drone shot captured the moment perfectly. Two worlds divided by a strip of frozen ground. On one side, Tony's empire locked in ice. On the other, Parker's polished convoy, alive and unstoppable. Within 3 days, the low, relentless growl of Parker's heavy iron erased the silence Tony left behind. From a ridge above the valley, Monica Beets watched through binoculars. Parker's lights cut through the night like fire. He didn't waste a single second, she muttered, jaw clenched. This wasn't business anymore. It felt like a full-scale invasion. Parker may have surrounded the land, but Tony was about to vanish below the surface, where rules didn't reach. You don't sideline a man like Tony Beets. Inside his office trailer, walls layered with maps and decades-old claim papers, Tony stood with his family, an inner circle. He jabbed a gloved finger into the heart of a geological chart. If they want a fight, he growled quietly, they'll get one. I've got to get down there, see it for myself, and then we deal with it. Phones came out immediately. Old favors were called in. Names that hadn't echoed through the Yukon in years. Contractors, drillers, men who still owed Tony from seasons past. You still got those pumps? He'd ask. I might need 'em. But the real shock wasn't legal retaliation. Tony wasn't just fighting back. He was planning to disappear. He pointed to a faded mark along the southern edge of the map, a narrow gulch he'd tested decades earlier, then walked away from. "No one's watching this spot," he said. "No inspectors, no cameras. We go small, no paperwork, off the grid." The room went dead silent. Everyone understood what he was suggesting. This wasn't a workaround, it was a reset. Word spread quietly through Tony's inner circle. He was preparing a shadow operation, an unregistered mine, invisible to regulators. If the government erased his name, he'd simply operate without one. Over the next several nights, loyal crew members slipped away from the main camp in pairs. Unmarked trucks, fuel drums scraped clean of labels, no schedules, no records. The Yukon grapevine lit up. "Beets is back at it." You can't stop a man like that. Meanwhile, Parker's operation exploded in scale. Bulldozers flattened new ground for a cutting-edge wash plant. Conveyor systems stretched across the flats. Early test runs spat out thick, bright flakes of gold. The exact kind of pay Tony had always claimed was the richest in the territory. For Parker, it was proof his gamble was already paying off. Then, things started to feel off. One morning, perimeter alarms triggered movement where no one should have been. The next night, fresh tire tracks appeared on a ridge untouched by company vehicles. Days later, a supervisor glanced upward and froze. A small black drone hovered silently above the wash plant, circling slowly. "That ours?" someone yelled. No one answered. Before anyone could react, the drone slipped into the morning fog and vanished. Parker stepped outside his trailer, eyes narrowed. He didn't ask who was behind it. He already knew. Miles to the west, at the forest's edge, Tony Beets stood beside his pickup, controller in hand. On the screen, Parker's entire operation in razor-sharp detail. Excavator placement, sluice box angles, fuel truck routes. A grin crept across Tony's face. "Nice setup, kid," he muttered. "Let's see how long it holds." The conflict had crossed a line. This was no longer a corporate takeover. It was espionage, sabotage, and pride. As winter tightened its grip, the war spilled beyond the ground and into the public eye. Social media erupted. Justice for Beets surged across platforms. Fans flooded comment sections, furious that the Klondike's king had been toppled by paperwork. Old clips of Tony barking orders went viral, symbols of raw, old-school grit. On the other side, environmental groups celebrated the shutdown, calling Tony's operation a disaster waiting to happen. Parker's image fractured. To some, he was a mastermind who seized the moment. To others, a scavenger feeding on a rival's collapse. Inside the Gold Rush production offices, the chaos was television gold. Every available camera crew was rushed north. Just when it seemed Parker had the upper hand, the story twisted again. An anonymous former Beets employee leaked photos to the press. The images were brutal. Rusted barrels leaking into a half-buried pit. Red stenciling screamed warnings. Cyanide residue. "Do not open" headlines exploded overnight. Toxic waste discovered at Beets' site. Tony, furious and cornered, called into a local radio show. "Those barrels aren't mine," he shouted. "They were there before I ever dug. Someone's setting me up." But the optics were brutal. Tire tracks appeared to link the barrels directly to one of Tony's old yards. Then came the twist no one expected. Satellite scans ordered to assess contamination revealed something else entirely, a massive underground anomaly. Government geologists confirmed it, an untouched alluvial pay zone, wide, dense, and potentially worth tens of millions in high-grade gold. And the real kicker? It sat directly beneath the sealed section of Tony's claim. When Parker learned this, new drill rigs appeared along the boundary within hours. If he couldn't mine the restricted zone, he'd drain everything around it. Watching from his cabin, Tony finally saw the full picture. The ban wasn't punishment, it was bait. A regulatory wall that locked Tony out while Parker mined the edges clean. This war had gone far beyond dirt and machines. Tony struck back in court. His lawyers filed an emergency injunction accusing the Territorial Office of unlawful seizure and corporate collusion, naming Parker's shell company as part of a coordinated takedown. Parker fired back with defamation and sabotage claims. The Yukon Supreme Court became the new battlefield. Then the bombshell dropped. Leaked documents showed multiple board members of Parker's shell company also sat on the board of the environmental firm that triggered Tony's shutdown. The courtroom froze. Conflict of interest, or something far darker? The temporary shutdown sent shockwaves through the Yukon. Two giants frozen at the same time, two empires forced to stop mid-stride. And for the first time, the goldfields went quiet, not from lack of machines, but from uncertainty. Helicopters circled overhead, ferrying inspectors, lawyers, and environmental teams from claim to claim. Stakes were planted, boundaries rechecked. Every inch of frozen ground became evidence. The North had turned into a courtroom, carved from ice. Parker retreated to strategy mode. Inside his trailer, whiteboards filled with contingency plans, alternate claims, backup wash plants, secondary crews on standby. He wasn't panicking, but the clock was now his enemy. Every idle hour meant lost gold, lost momentum, and lost leverage. Tony, meanwhile, embraced the chaos. To him, this wasn't delay, it was opportunity. If Parker needed clean paper and public approval, Tony thrived in the shadows. While officials focused on permits and press releases, Tony's off-grid crew kept moving deeper into the bush. Generators hummed under camouflage tarps. Hand-built sluices ran quietly through moonlit creeks. No floodlights, no GPS logs, just cold hands, sharp instincts, and old-school mining grit. Gold began to show almost immediately, chunky flakes caught in moss-lined riffles, proof that Tony's instincts were still deadly accurate. Word spread fast, not through headlines, but through whispers. He's pulling gold again. No permits, no cameras. They'll never catch him. But secrets don't stay buried forever in the Yukon. One night, as snow hammered the valley, a lone figure approached Parker's camp, hood up, face hidden. He didn't ask for warmth or money, just 5 minutes. Inside the trailer, he slid a memory card across the table. "This is where Beets is operating," he said. "Off the books, South Gulch. You didn't hear it from me." The footage was grainy, but clear enough. Tony's shadow crew, unmarked equipment. Gold concentrates being packed and hauled before dawn. Parker stared at the screen. This wasn't just illegal, it was dangerous. If regulators found out, Tony wouldn't just lose claims. He could lose everything. And now Parker had the upper hand again. But instead of calling authorities, Parker waited. He understood something others didn't. Information is most powerful when it's held, not spent. Across the valley, Tony sensed it. The air felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. He doubled security, rotated access routes, grounded drones. If Parker wanted a clean war, Tony was ready to make it dirty. The season had transformed into something darker than mining. This was about legacy, about pride, about who truly owned the Yukon, not on paper, but in blood, sweat, and frozen ground. The judge's ruling loomed closer each day. One decision could crown a new king, or resurrect the old one. If Parker won, he wouldn't just inherit land, he'd inherit history. If Tony won, the North would learn a brutal lesson. You can shut down a name, but you can't kill a miner. And somewhere beneath the frozen soil, tens of millions in gold waited patiently for the survivor. Because in the Yukon, the ground doesn't care who you are. It only rewards the last man standing. The judge, overwhelmed, delayed the ruling and ordered both operations temporarily suspended. So what was it? A brilliant power play or a dirty game played behind the scenes? Tell us who you're backing in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more Gold Rush drama.